Hello, the Pioneer viewers. How are you doing? I hope you're healthy and well. Today we will continue to shed light on the Russia-Ukraine war. War is a multifaceted phenomenon. It has to be analyzed from every angle and followed from every angle. This applies not only to the people outside of the war, but also to soldiers serving in the war. In the Russia-Ukraine war, we and you are trying to analyze the war from all sides. The Ukrainian army is doing the same, but we cannot say that the Russian army is doing the same. The Russian army makes the same mistakes again and again. This fact was once again demonstrated by the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian armed forces in recent days. First, missile strikes and destroyed Russian command posts. Then, the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian drones. We have witnessed similar events many times since the beginning of the war, right? We are witnessing it once again. The Russian army is still unable to protect its command posts and stop Ukrainian attacks inside its borders. So what is the details of the latest operations carried out by the Ukrainian army? Let's analyze the developments together. As the Pioneer, we continue to bring the Russia-Ukraine war to your screens. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so as not to miss our daily map reports and reports on the agenda. You can also help us reach more people by commenting on our videos. Let's start if you're ready, the Pioneer reports. As you know, some strategic points are crucial as long as the war continues. Command points, supply lines, ammunition depots, and many other areas. Notice that the two armies have a different style here. The Russian army is organizing more borderless attacks. In other words, it does not observe targets. Even the past days, Russian soldiers in the region talked about the misuse of artillery support. Complaining about the Russian artillery units targeted empty lands, Russian soldiers stated that the artillery support was just for show. In other words, we have seen here that the vast majority of the bombardments carried out by the Russian army are dysfunctional. The Ukrainian army, on the other hand, is implementing the opposite strategy. As you know, the Ukrainian strategy is generally based on small but effective attacks. We have seen this since the beginning of the war. For example, pinpoint operations against the Black Sea Fleet on the Crimean Peninsula or critical attacks on important airbase of the Russian army can be considered in the context. These attacks not only paralyzed the Russian military but also increased the anti-war sentiment of the Russian citizens. A similar situation was experienced in the recent attacks. The Ukrainian army both dealt a heavy blow to the Russian army and made a move to increase their anti-war sentiment of the Russian citizens. The first statements regarding the operations in question came from the Ukrainian General Staff. Making the said statements on social media, the Ukrainian General Staff stated that the Ukrainian army has entered into hot clashes with the Russian soldiers at 73 points in the past days. The statement used in the statement as follows. Within the scope of the operation to liberate Ukraine, the Air Force of the Defense Forces carried out the attacks on the areas where Russian personnel, weapons and military equipments are concentrated, and 2 attacks on the enemy's anti-aircraft missile systems. The missile units hit 3 command posts, 2 ammunition depots, and the focal areas of enemy's personnel, weapons and military equipment. It also repulsed their attacks on the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts and repulsed attacks near the town of Bakhmut. Russian forces trying to advance on the Zaporizhia front line were also successfully repulsed by our defense. Russian forces trying to advance on the Zaporizhia front line were also successfully repulsed by our defenders. These are the statements of the Ukrainian General Staff. According to local sources, most of the attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces on the Russian command posts and the Russian ammunition depots took place on the Kherson front line. And what do the Russian sources say about this? You guessed it right. Russian sources are playing the card of silence about these attacks and their impact. However, according to the reports of local sources, the Russian losses, both in the command centers and in the ammunition depots, are considerable. We understand the accuracy of the claims of local sources by the silence of the Russian sources. As we have often mentioned in our map reports, the Kherson front line is very busy. Here, Ukrainian troops are trying to further expand their dominance. Of course, for this, the Russian defense lines need to be weakened as much as possible. In this weakening, the points of the two armies outside the conflict's area that will reinforce the Russian forces must be destroyed. In this weakening, the points of the two armies outside the conflict areas that will reinforce the Russian forces must be destroyed. As I mentioned before, the Ukrainian army is playing this game very carefully. The veins that feed the Russian army are first destroyed. In this way, the resistance of the Russian army is tried to be broken. As you will remember, in recent days, the Russian army had already suffered heavy losses due to the storm around the Kherson front line. With these attacks, we can say that the defense capacity of the Russian army has decreased a little more. So what does this situation lead to? Of course, in the coming days, the advances of the Ukrainian armed forces on the Kherson front line will accelerate further. We already see an obvious superiority. Russian sources commenting on the region often state that the Russian army suffered heavy losses in the region. There are also many reports that Russian soldiers in the region are tired and exhausted. From this point of view, we can say that the possibility of the Ukrainian army advancing in the Kherson has increased. In addition, international sources claim that the Russian army has suffered heavy losses, referring to the attacks carried out by the Ukrainian army in recent days. Of course, we need to look at the reflection of the situation in Russian sources. In general, the silence of the Russian sources about the losses of the Russian army confirms these allegations. Let us even point out that in recent days, international sources have shared reports that Russian airstrikes in Avdiivka have lost their effectiveness. Russian sources still have not made statements on this issue. If we take into account that the progress of the Russian army in the region have slowed down, we can say that these claims is also true. Another notable attack was directed against the Berdyansk regions of Russia. According to reports, the silence in the night hours was broken by the sighting of Ukrainian drones in the skies of Berdyansk. According to reports, Ukrainian drones that took off in the late hours hit a warehouse in the Berdyansk region where unmanned aerial vehicles used by the Russian army were stored. It is reported by local sources that the strong explosions were heard in the region with the heat. Russian sources remained silent hit a warehouse as usual. This attack of the Ukrainian armed forces on the Berdyansk region is similar to the attacks on the Kherson front line. In coming days, the Ukrainian army should increase these attacks. If these attacks increases, both Russian pressure on the Donetsk will be broken and the Ukrainian army will make faster progress on the Kherson front line. What do you think? How do you think the strategic offensives of the Ukrainian army will affect the Russian army? Do you expect more Ukrainian gains on the Kherson front line? How do you assess the warehouse offensive in the Berdyansk? Let me know in the comments. I read and care about all your comments.